All right, today we're going to break down those high stakes peace talks between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. And what we have here is a really fascinating story. It's a potential breakthrough where you see these huge, ambitious promises for the future colliding with the really hard realities of territory and control on the ground.
So, heading into this meeting, you hear this quote from Ukrainian President Zelensky, right? 90% of the way there. And you gotta ask, what's really going on there? Well, it's not just wishful thinking. It was a really smart strategic move. By saying a deal is almost done, he was basically suggesting the big pieces are already in place, which puts a ton of pressure on sorting out those final, really difficult issues.
But you know how it is in any big negotiation, that last 10%? That's everything. And these talks really capture that tension perfectly. I mean, there was real tangible progress made on what Ukraine's security could look like for decades, but then you have what they call the thorny issues. And that's really just code for who controls the land. And that remains a massive roadblock.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the big picture from the talks. Then we'll dig into the number one sticking point, the Donbas region. After that, we'll look at where they actually found common ground on security, we'll factor in Moscow's perspective, and then finally, we'll map out what could happen next.
So they all meet at Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. And the whole point was to try and push this revised peace plan over the finish line. And while both leaders came out and said, we made progress, which is a big deal in itself, they were also super careful to manage expectations and say that a final all-in breakthrough, well, that hadn't been reached just yet.
All right, let's get to the real heart of the problem here. The one issue that could make this whole deal fall apart is the future of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. And look, this isn't just about drawing lines on a map. We're talking about industrial heartlands, about cultural identity, about strategic control. This is where two totally competing visions for Ukraine's entire future just collide head-on. First off, just a quick clarification for everyone. When we say Donbass, what are we actually talking about? It's pretty simple. It's the collective name for two of Ukraine's big, historic industrial regions in the east, Donetsk and Luhansk. In this chart right here, wow, it just perfectly illustrates the sheer scale of the challenge. You have to understand the reality on the ground to get why this is so critical. For Moscow, this control isn't just some bargaining chip. It's a strategic buffer, it's control over vital industry. Any negotiation has to start from this very, very difficult reality.
Now, this is where you can really see just how far apart the two sides are. On one hand, Ukraine is proposing a path that could lead to reintegration, an economic zone policed by them, with the final decision going to the people in a referendum. But Russia's demand, it's absolute. A full Ukrainian withdrawal, which would basically cement Moscow's military control. But even with that huge gap, you have Donald Trump coming out and projecting a lot of optimism. He admits the issue isn't resolved, but he claims the two sides are getting a lot closer. So what does that mean? Is that a sign of real progress happening behind closed doors, or is it just diplomatic talk to keep the momentum going? That's the key question, isn't it?
Okay, let's switch gears for a second. Let's talk about an area where there was actually a lot of agreement and see how this could build a path forward. We're talking about security guarantees, and this is probably where that 90% of the deal that Zelensky mentioned really is.
And the U.S. put a hard number on the table. They've offered a 15-year security guarantee. And that's not just some random number. It's a huge signal of a deep, long-term commitment to Ukraine's defense, something designed to provide stability for a whole generation.
And here you can see they're not arguing about the basic idea, they're just haggling over the details. But these details matter a lot. A 15-year term that can be extended offers a really powerful deterrent, but it also leaves future options open. Ukraine's push for 50 years, well, that's aiming for something much closer to a permanent alignment with the West, a promise that would shape security in Europe for the rest of the century.
And true to form, Trump made it crystal clear that this would not be a blank check from Washington. His expectation that European allies would shoulder a big part of this whole effort, well, that's a core piece of his foreign policy. It's all about redistributing the security burden and making sure the countries with the most at stake are also the most invested. Of course, a deal like this doesn't happen in a vacuum. There's a third major party here that gets a definitive say. So what's the view for Moscow? Well, on a key piece of the puzzle that Ukraine's plan needs to even work, Russia's position is completely firm, unmoving.
So here's the roadblock. For Ukraine to hold a national referendum on any peace deal, which is a huge part of their proposal, they say they absolutely need a 60-day ceasefire. But the Kremlin? They've just flat out rejected any kind of temporary pause in the fighting.
And their reasoning, at least the reason they're giving, is pretty straightforward. A top Russian diplomat, Yuri Ushakov, basically said that a temporary ceasefire doesn't end the war, it just pauses it. From their perspective, it could allow their opponent to rearm and regroup, and any pause in their momentum is a strategic loss.
So where does all this leave us? On one hand, you've got a near agreement on a historic, long-term security plan. On the other, you've got a complete impasse on territory and the basic mechanics of a ceasefire. So what are the actual next steps to keep this thing from falling apart? Well, a pretty clear diplomatic path has been laid out. There's a proposed meeting at the White House in January to try and build on the progress. And, critically, the allies are going to meet in Paris next month to hammer out the specifics on those security guarantees. And Trump has even floated the idea of direct talks with Russia, although he was careful to add that it would only be at the right time.
And that brings us right back to the ultimate question, doesn't it? With a landmark agreement on Ukraine's future security so close you can almost taste it, the foundational issue of who controls the land is as difficult as ever. So I'll leave you with this to think about. What kind of compromise or pressure or event on the battlefield could possibly bridge that final, formidable 10%?